Okay, we're gonna get this video for Ryan Moss. We're gonna go back to the criminalization of blackness. Brother Moss made a comment, made a lengthy comment with some really good points, unpacked some really good things about the black community, and obviously consistent with what we're trying to accomplish as we are drawing to the end of my first year of graduate school. Um, we are going to address this in a historical manner and put a historiography to this issue. And the issue that was brought up was by Brother Moss within the context of our argument was the acceptance and perpetuation of the criminalization of blackness within the black community. So again, the perpetuation and acceptance of the criminalization of blackness within the black community, not this being imposed upon us, this actually being us perpetuating it within our community and imposing it on each other. He brought up a few points that I wrote down so I can be accurate. Native sensitivity, when people talk about Native Americans or Holocaust survivors, how this natural sensitivity comes up when we're talking about their oppressive experience in the world, and how automatic sensitivities go to that when blacks are met with pull yourself up by your bootstraps. And it's a very famous interview with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. where he said it is cruel to tell a man to pull himself up by his own bootstraps when he doesn't have boots. Now, this was, he was referring to the slave being emancipated with no resources of his own, not even owning the clothes on his back. So that was, that's in line with what Brother Moss was talking about. And he was saying that there is a do for yourself culture amongst black people when you try to explain to them our history, and they fight back against that history. And we're gonna, we're definitely gonna look into that. And he was saying that the government hasn't done enough in when that is said to black people, how they characterize that as blacks wanting a handout. And we'll actually get more into that and why that perspective is there. And he said it appears as though we are ashamed of our heritage and that we don't know our history. And some of these things may be true, but there's some more information that goes on with that if we look at it from a historical perspective. And now we're not talking about excuse me, the entire African diaspora right now. We are specifically talking about the American Negro. Okay, we're talking about 1619 Jamestown, Virginia. We're talking 244 years of slavery. We're talking emancipation 1863. We're talking the 13th Amendment 1865. We're talking the 14th Amendment in 1866 or 1867, which was equal protection under the law. And granted that the 13th Amendment only stopped chattel slavery. It did not stop slavery in the United States, which is why we have mass incarceration. But if we follow that group of the diaspora, you have to break it into northern and southern. Now, you have, I'm trying to figure out which order to go in. So I'm just going to go. Northern people, northern blacks were free. Well, free does not mean equal. Doesn't. It's a whole line I can go on that, but it doesn't. All right. Northwest Indiana, where I grew up, is still segregated. All the black people live in Gary. All of the Latinos live in East Chicago, and the whites live everywhere else. Pretty much in Indiana, you have black people in Muncie, Indianapolis, and Gary. Pretty much, it's still segregated. You had redlining. You had the Klan did march up north. Um, Unions, all types of separation in community where it was not necessarily black and white water fountains, but free did not at all mean equal. Okay, it was just better than the oppression that was in the South. Now, what we have to understand is, as we followed that chain all the way up to 1865, where chattel slavery ended, there was no formal curriculum for black education. So now we had two things happen. We had education offered by two groups of white people. White people who had a capitalistic interest in perpetuating society and maintaining blacks as free labor in the United States, which was what we were brought here for. And then you had another group who of white people, because that was the empowered community. They knew inherently that there was a wrong being done, and they wanted to help, and they knew that to level the playing field at some point, that education was needed. But the only education was the education endorsed and created by the imperialistic body, which is the United States of America. So when they taught us the best they knew, taught us what they knew. Now, we're not talking about the people who purposely engineered curriculum that denigrated and enculturated black people into second-class citizenship. We're not talking about that. We're talking about the people who really meant well. And what they taught was what was important. And what was important was what they were taught. Because what's good for the goose is good for the gander. Well, not necessarily. Because what they taught were European ideals. They taught, you all came over here in boats. They were taught the American dream. They were taught, if you work hard enough, you will get. But that's not the case in the historiography of 1619, slavery, emancipation, 13th Amendment. That's a big difference from the Mayflower. That's a big difference from the Green Atlantic. That's a big difference from the White Atlantic. That's a big difference from the Northern Atlantic. Okay? So, why is it Brother Ross is having this issue where, we buck against this information? This is why we're bucking against the information. Just like we were given the Bible, that black folk, you can't argue against the Bible. That is our core, it's our center. Yet, when we are entertained with information hundreds of thousands of years older than the Bible, which we can see the Bible was derived from, with information and technology that exceeds the technology that we have today, we can accept the technology of that day. We can accept the inventions of that day. We can accept the intellect of that day, but we cannot accept the Sumerian revelation from where we came, which is the Anunnaki, because we are so ingrained in Jesus and the angels and the earth was made in 7 days and all of Noah and all of these other stories that really came from Sumerian writings. But just like we are so stuck in that story, we're as stuck in our indoctrination into the country and in the American dream. Black folks have died in every war that this country has had because black people were educated, and that was ingrained in us as deeply as Christianity is. So basically, telling black people that their history is something different than what it is like telling them to look into the biblical writings before the Bible. Where did the phrase come from that, in the beginning the earth was dark and void without shape? Where did that come from? Verbatim. We won't even entertain that, just like we can't entertain the fact that our history we were taught was a completely different history. And to learn it is reimagining something as deeply ingrained as reimagining Christianity. It's big, a lot to unpack. Thank you, brother Ryan Moss, for the comment.